And welcome back as we get ready to look at another class in our repertoire, which is that of the object class. And this is a very important class in Java that we're actually going to have to look at. Now, the class known as object exists pretty much within every kind of program that we're going to be looking at here. And it's because it's an ancestor of every class. And every class is a derived class pretty much of the class object. And we just don't see it, and so you don't have to worry about seeing like the word extends on every class because it's kind of automatic. Every object of every class is of type object as well as being the type of its class. And of course all the types of its various ancestor classes. Even classes that we define ourselves are descendant classes of the class object. And here's the nice thing about object. As I mentioned, it's kind of automatic. You don't have to make your class a derived class or some class, all right, for object to come into play. All right, if you don't make it a derived class, it's just a regular base class, for example. Java automatically makes it a derived class of the class object. All right, again, this is all automatic. It's not something we have to do. We don't have to type like extends object for it to actually come into play. Now, if we actually want to see object in play in Java, the thing you have to remember is that the class object allows us to write Java code for methods with the parameter of type object that can be replaced by an object of any class whatsoever. So you can really kind of think of an object really almost being as a placeholder rather than a predefined base type. Now we eventually encounter library methods that do accept a type object as an argument. And therefore, you can use an argument as an object of pretty much any class if that's the case. Now, again, as I already mentioned, the class object is in the Java language package. This is not something you have to, therefore, worry about importing. It's done automatically. We don't have to have an import statement, for example, to import the class object into our code. It's all done automatically. Now, we need to, of course, quickly talk about the toString and the equals methods, because if you recall, one of the things we said is almost every class is typically going to have a toString and an equals method in Java. And why is that? We've talked about this before, but we never really talked about the reason why we use toString and equals. Well, it's because the class object has some methods that every Java class inherits. And two of those methods, of course, are toString and equals. And because they are objects, they inherit those methods from that ancestor class, which is typically either going to therefore be the object class itself that's going to pass those methods down, or a class that itself has inherited the methods ultimately from the class object. So for example, our employee class has a equals and a toString that gives it its predefinition, but those are really just coming from the object class. Now, the thing to remember is that the inherited methods, equals, and toString will not work correctly for almost any class we define. It's not going to be something that just works out of the box. You can't just leave it as a blank equals method. What we instead need to do is go ahead and override that inherited method definition with a new, more appropriate definition, which is why, for example, when we look at our employee class or hourly employee class or any of those other ones, or even we just look at our base class, just for example, our employee, remember, it is redefined to use variables specific to that class because we don't want it to have just a generic output. We want that toString to be precise to what we are actually looking at. Now, we already said that equals and toString needs some redefinition. All right. For example, we look at our employee. Employee has its own definition. So it's important for us to include those definitions of toString and equals in any class we define because some library classes that exist in Java assume that your class has such methods. That's why we always say, hey, do you have an equals and a toString method in here? Because if you start using certain things from the Java library, they're going to be looking for those methods. Now, there's no subtleties really involved in defining, redefining, or overriding the method toString. It's pretty much straightforward. And we've seen a lot of good examples of how we can use that toString method in many of our class definitions. It's, again, a very straightforward approach. However, the definition for overriding equals does have some subtleties, and we're going to look at those in an upcoming lesson.